First off, I'd like to thank everyone that's helped me create this talk and create this paper. There's been a lot of volunteers that have helped me just and creating it together. And also I'd like to thank Hunter Industries for supporting me and allowing me to come out here and talk about this. So a reintroduction of myself. So my name is Thomas Desmond, and I work for Hunter Industries. We are a manufacturing company that manufactures sprinklers and lighting. So we're not generally a tech company, we're actually mostly a manufacturing company based out of San Diego doing sprinklers and lighting. If you're interested in contacting me, my Twitter is Thomas J. Desmond, or you can find me at my website, thetombomb.com. So you can find me there if you have any questions or you want to get in contact afterwards. So creating quality with mob programming. How many people here have heard of mob programming? Oh, cool. How many people have actually done mob programming themselves? Okay, a lot fewer. But at least people have heard about it, so that's great. So Hunter Industries, we mob program on all of our production software. This is our design, implementation, tests, maintenance, deployment, everything. We are actually not allowed to develop software alone. We have to mod program on all of our software. There has to be at least one other person, preferably 2 or 3 other people with us whenever we're developing any code that's going to go into production. And we've been doing this for about 8 years now. We found it to be really successful, and the quality of the software that we get out of it is really high, and that's why we've been mob programming for so long at Hunter Industries. And today I want to talk about what mob programming is, how it started, the benefits that we're seeing in it, and some things to consider about mob programming if you've never done it yourself. So first off, what is mob programming? This is an extreme software development approach where we have multiple people working together in a group on software. So we generally have anywhere from 3 to 5 developers. I usually like working in a group of 4 developing software. So we're doing the entire software development lifecycle, including tests. So I'm a software developer as by title, but the QA engineers are in with us. We've mobbed with our product owners before, we've mobbed with visitors before. So anyone can be on the mob team that's interested or has a stake in the software itself. And I like to use this quote by Woody Zuhl, one of the founders of mob programming. All the brilliant people working on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and on the same computer. So what does this mean? Let's break this down a little bit. All the brilliant people working on the same thing. So for us, it's usually 4 people working on one thing. We're all working on the same feature together, collaborating face to face. And we're at the same time and in the same space. We're sitting next to each other, we're standing next to each other. We're in an open environment where we just are right next to one another. And we're on the same computer. So we have 4 people at one computer working together. So what does this really look like? This is a mob setup at Hunter Industries. This would be one mob. We have 4 people working together. There's those monitors are actually 80-inch monitors that we work with. So we've got these 80-inch monitors and standing desk options, sitting options, ergonomic keyboards. We have vertical mice, trackballs. So there's all different sorts of setups available. But this is what one mob looks like at Hunter Industries. And we have 9 of these right now developing all of our production software. So we have 9 setups that look very similar, just like this, with huge monitors. And technically we're at one computer, but this is what one computer looks like to us, as a large setup with plenty of room to stand, move around. You'll notice everything is on wheels, even the TVs. So we can just move around wherever things need to be or wherever we want to develop or work. We can just move it to wherever we want it to be. So like I said, we have 9 of these with 27 developers working on 4 different projects currently. So this is how we're doing this full time every day, all day. Mob programming. So how did this start? How did this idea of having 4 people work together, 4 people doing the same thing, 4 people doing one thing? And it really started 8 years ago at Hunter Industries when the team was doing more traditional software development. They were siloed, they were in their cubicles working alone. And one day, one of the developers had a problem. He didn't think he was going to be able to complete the feature that he had. He didn't think he was going to be able to finish the task and meet his deadline. So he told his colleagues this. He said, I'm not going to be able to meet my deadline. I'm not going to be able to complete this. So they decided, well, let's go to a conference room and talk about it. Let's kind of decide kind of come up with a solution together. And in that conference room, they actually did. They came up with a solution, they were able to complete the task, and they were able to meet the deadline because they worked together, because they were collaborating on the solution. And this was 8 years ago. And the team, had some agile practices, and they were doing daily retrospectives. And at that retrospective that day, they said, well, we really liked working together. We really liked being a team and collaborating and solving the problems together. So they decided in the future, let's do this again. If someone has a problem that they don't think they're going to be able to complete, if someone has a task that they don't think they're going to be able to finish, let's work on it together. Let's collaborate. So that happened in the future. Someone had a problem, they worked together, they fixed it, and actually, whenever they worked together, they were able to find solutions and be able to complete the task and meet deadlines. So this continued, and eventually they actually started mob programming full-time. This group of 5 developers started mob programming because of the retrospectives that they had. They decided, let's turn up the good, and this is really working for us. We're getting quality software out of it. Let's start mobbing full-time. And one of the funny parts about this, at the beginning at least, is that they didn't have a permanent space to do this. They were jumping from conference room to conference room. And we have about 7 buildings in our location, so they would book a conference room for 2 hours, get kicked out of that one, run to another building, book a conference room there, stay there for 2 hours, get kicked out of that one, and have to move to another conference room. So that wasn't very conducive to actually creating code and solving problems. But luckily, the director of the IS department at the time really liked what he was seeing, really liked the software that they were producing, and ended up giving them a permanent space to mob program. And that's when it really took off. That's when the team was really able to generate some quality software. This is in about 2011 to 2015. They went from 300 bugs in production to 0. And it stayed at 0 for a year and a half. They didn't have a single bug reported in production for a year and a half because of mob programming, because of the development that they were doing together. And when they saw that in 2015, when they saw 0 bugs in production and continued 0 bugs in production, that's when they started growing the team, and we're now at the 9 mobs working on 4 different projects with 27 developers working full-time mob programming. And so I like to think that mob programming, it really originally started from the retrospectives. The team was retrospecting daily, trying to find ways to turn up the good, improve on their processes, and just create better software. And in those retrospectives, they came out with, well, we like working together, we like working as a team, let's actually do it all day, every day. And luckily, the people at Hunter Industries were supportive of it and let them continue mob programming, and it's kind of evolved into what it is today. So we're still doing retrospectives, we're still evolving, it's still changing. This has been a long 8-year process to get where we are today, but we're still kind of putting out some really good quality software, and it's a really fun environment to work in as well. And one of the things that I hear a lot from mob programming is, well, how can that be effective? How is that useful to use 4 people's time to do one thing? How can that possibly be engaging? How can that possibly be a worthwhile, financially wise thing to do? And that's where I like to bring in this driver navigator model. And this is how we keep everyone engaged, how we keep everyone involved in the code. There's this idea that there's a driver, and that's the person at the keyboard. There's always only one person at the keyboard. And then there's navigators, who are the 3 or 4 other people around them that are navigating the code forward. Those navigators are talking to each other, collaborating, and talking in plain English to be able to move the code forward. Your question?
Yeah, so are you doing the mob programming all day long, every day? Like, you never go back to your desks?
Nope, we don't have our own personal desks.
So this is you go to your little station group.
Yep.
Of the 3 monitors, and you work, and then do you switch around? Do you always work with the same 2? Okay.
So I'll get to that in a second.
All right, cool.
But yeah, so this is the idea of the driver navigator model, where there is, let's say, 3 people navigating the code, collaborating together, and then there's the driver who's at the keyboard. And the point of the driver is not to implement any of their own ideas. We don't want the driver to implement any of their own ideas into the code, because they're supposed to just be a dumb input device that can translate the navigation into code. So this quote from Llewellyn Falco of, for an idea to go from your head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands, is saying that you must be able to navigate your idea, you must be able to navigate and explain your idea in plain English for the driver to be able to put that into code. So we don't want someone at the keyboard typing and explaining their ideas. We want people to be, the navigators to be sharing their ideas, and then everyone else can understand it and see where the code is going forward. And this driver-navigator model really helps keep us engaged and makes sure that it's not just one person typing away at the keyboard. So to get to the changing roles question, we use something called Mobster, which is a mob timer. And this screen actually comes up and blacks out the entire screen, and we can't do any development work while it's up. And this happens on my teams. We've been working at 7 minutes is how often we are changing roles. So this pops up every 7 minutes and blacks out the entire screen. You can't actually do any development work until you press continue. And it's saying that, Thomas, it's my turn to go now. John, you'll be up next. So this is how we transfer between the different roles of driver and navigator every 7 minutes. And we find that keeps a really good engagement if you're at the keyboard at least every like 20 to 30 minutes. And it makes sure that if someone's navigating the code and kind of taking over the solution, they have to become the driver at some point. And when they're the driver, they're not allowed to implement their own ideas. We can actually take away the keyboard from them or tell them that, hey, you're not allowed to implement your own ideas. And it can be difficult to not implement your own ideas, so that does happen pretty often where, hey, you're not a navigator, it's now time to listen to the navigators that are on your team. So this is how we kind of keep engagement, keep people motivated, and switch around the roles throughout the day. There are plenty of other roles that you'll see in a mob, and not just the driver navigator. Those would probably be the most important two that come out of it. But there is a mob programming role-playing game developed by Willem Larsen, and it's a gamified version of mob programming that you can mob program with your teams and also kind of play a game as well. And this is a great resource to learn about the different roles. He gives a great explanation about every role. And this is available on GitHub, the mob programming role-playing game developed by Willem Larsen. And IBM actually has done some mob programming as well, and they released an experience report about their experience mob programming and the roles that they saw while doing it. So there are plenty of other companies that are doing mob programming as well, and IBM is one of those. So let's jump into the benefits. Why is Hunter Industries mob programming? Why are we doing development this way? Why has it worked for us? And the number one benefit would be communication. We are getting face-to-face communication with our teammates all day, every day. I am sitting next to my teammates or standing next to my teammates 3 feet away from them all day. And that might sound scary to some people, but it actually is a really great environment where you can bounce off ideas with another if you're just talking all day. And this leads to fewer meetings. I have maybe 1 to 2 hours a week of mandatory meetings that I have to go to, and the rest of the time is coding and working with my team. At my last job, I had days where I didn't actually write code because I'd just be in meetings. So we have fewer formal meetings at least. If we want to talk about the architecture, we're sitting next to each other with a whiteboard next to us. We just start talking about it. We don't schedule a conference room. We don't schedule a meeting. We just start talking about the things that we need to talk about, and whatever we're developing, we can just, in-time meetings is kind of what we call it. If our product owner wants to see what we're doing, he walks over and just starts working and talking to us. There's very few formal meetings that get scheduled while programming. And the last benefit that's a real big personal benefit would be my questions get answered immediately. And I have a lot of questions when I'm programming. I want to understand everything. I want to see understand how all the code works. So I ask a lot of questions. And in mobbing, it's really easy and you're encouraged to ask questions because everyone's in the same context. Everyone's working together on the same code. We want to make sure that everyone has the same context as well, so questions are really encouraged. In a more traditional environment, at previous jobs, I kind of think to myself, well, crap. I've asked John 5 questions today. I've disturbed him 5 times, caused him to context switch 5 times. He's had to help me with my problems. He has his own features that he needs to implement. So instead of asking the questions now, I'll write them on a sticky note and ask him tomorrow. So at least I can disturb him in the morning once with a bunch of questions. And that's not conducive to great development. We want our questions to get answered immediately. We want to get that instant feedback. And in mob programming, we're really encouraged to ask as many questions as possible to those around us. And that can really breed some quality software. Yes.
Do the questions, they sort of interrupt the flow? So like if you're the driver, you might ask a question as well?
Mhm.
And everything kind of comes to a halt during the question answer?
Yes, but it's kind of the same idea that if you had the question, probably someone else in the group had the question, and it really just makes, sometimes I'll ask a question and I'll get two different answers, and I'm like, well, what's the real answer here? There's some disconnect. Let's talk about what the real, or what's really going on. So I mean, you could say it disrupts the flow, but it's more, I don't know, since you're in the same context, since you're in the same code, it's kind of, it builds upon it. Yeah, yes.
How does this work when you're onboarding someone new? Because I think it's working really well for a bunch of experts, but how does it work when you have one person who's really new?
We throw them right into the middle of it. So the question was, what do we do with someone new? And we throw them right into the middle of it. And we actually find that it leads to a much easier kind of, they can start contributing a lot faster because there's experts around them that are moving the code forward, that are pushing the code forward. We know what the C# syntax and standards are. We can share that knowledge and better disperse it amongst each other. So we throw people in the middle of it, and we find that within a week or two they're contributing, whereas in normally past traditional settings it might be 3 months of reading documentation before you're really contributing. Question here?
When do you pause the mob timer? So if a conversation gets started or the product owner walks in, do you pause the mob timer, or do you just keep it going?
Yeah, we can pause it. We can quit it or pause it or hide it. So generally we'll just kind of click continue when it pops up as we go forward. But it can be quit, it can be paused, especially in those like meetings. It's not really, the mob timer doesn't really work when you're just having a conversation. Yeah. But like one last question in the back, then I move forward. Yes.
I want to piggyback on the idea of having somebody in there that's new.
Yeah.
And the idea of having a developer that's more skilled at development as opposed to one that's more new at code.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, do you have a team, and do you have an ideal team? Because I think like maybe the idea is that if you got 3 really experienced developers, that's the best team possible. And I think that maybe that might not be the conclusions you'd reach. Maybe it'd be the kind of thing where you got like one that's really good and really skilled, one that's kind of in the middle, and one that's kind of new, and the 3 together make the best team. Do you have an answer to that?
I don't have a scientific answer to that, but in my opinion, I actually like the more distributed team where there's a junior, mid, and a senior maybe. They can better kind of, if you have a lot of seniors, there's sometimes some strong personalities that don't want to listen to each other. But when we have kind of a distributed team, there's kind of everyone kind of starts coming and bringing up to the same level. And I guess I personally like it when it's a more distributed team. And we do have this idea of taking the junior voice. So if there is a lower junior, we like to try their ideas just to see where it goes, if they do have an idea versus the senior's idea. But the next benefit that I want to talk about is knowledge sharing. And this is the idea that if 3 or 4 people are doing the same thing, that we're benefiting from a redundant knowledge going on. And former mob programmer Jason Kearney talked about how mob programming benefited from transactive memory. And this is the idea that if multiple people are doing the same thing, sharing the same experience, they're going to remember different pieces of that experience so they can better recall it in the future. So we are benefiting from this transactive memory where 4 people are working on something together. They can remember different pieces of that, and in the future we can better remember how or why something was done. So there's a lot more reduction of knowledge silos going on. There's a redundant knowledge happening when you're developing any of the features. And one of our lofty goals is to reduce knowledge silos, and mob programming does that really well for us. Next benefit would be idea generation and development. One study found that a mob programming team actually came up with more creative ideas and more creative solutions. And this was because there were 4 people together able to bounce off ideas with one another and exchange ideas. If you have a half-baked idea, it's encouraged to share it, because then someone else can piggyback off of it or expand upon it and create it into a full-fledged idea. So it's not just up to you to find the one solution that solves all problems. It's not just up to you to find the solution that fixes everything. And personally for me, this has led to a huge reduction in stress because it's no longer just me alone developing something. Previously, I'd have problems where it'd be 5 o'clock at night, I'd go home not knowing how to complete the feature, not knowing how to complete the task. The next day I come in at 8 o'clock, I'm in a bad mood, I look at my computer, still don't know what I'm supposed to do. So it's just really stressful to come in and feel like, well, I'm the one supposed to be knowledgeable, I'm the one supposed to be able to find the right solution, and that can be really difficult if you're alone or if there's not a lot of people to talk to. So while in mob programming, we benefit from kind of a larger pool of people to come up with ideas to find the best solution to our problems. And last would be elevated learning. So there's a ton of learning that goes on in mob programming. We actually are given 7 hours a week as dedicated learning time, 1 hour a day and 3 hours on Friday to learn anything that we want that can help improve our development processes. And that's a huge amount of time that I really, really enjoy having. And the great part about that is if I learn about a new testing framework, I can bring that to the team, navigate them through that testing framework, navigate them through what I learned, and that shares what I learned with them. If they learn a new design pattern that we can refactor to, they can share and navigate us through how we can implement that design pattern in our own code. So there's a lot of sharing of knowledge. This is where that driver navigator model really helps out even more, is people being able to navigate the code that they've learned, or navigate things that they've learned and put it into the code. And a personal experience where this really came out was in January of 2017. I joined a new project team that was working on mobile development using a framework called Xamarin Forms. I had never written a mobile app before, and I'd never heard of Xamarin Forms before. So there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to kind of pick up on. But by the end of August of 2017, so just about 9 months later, I accepted a position at the local university to teach mobile development using Xamarin Forms. So from January to August, I went from zero knowledge to actually teaching a university level course on Xamarin Forms because of the knowledge sharing that was going on. My questions were able to get answered immediately. We were generating the best ideas with my other coworkers, and we were sharing all that knowledge with one another. So it was really high amount of learning that was going on while mob programming, and that's really beneficial for creating software. So those are all great things about mob programming, just how amazing it is and how much I love doing it. But some things to consider, first off, would be the work environment. So most all the pictures have been of our actual work environment, and this is another one. We have very few to no permanent walls in our environment, so it's extremely open. This is us having, I think we're doing a training that day, so we just kind of have all the tables in the middle. But there's no cubicles, you're not on your headphone, you're with headphones in developing software, you're collaborating, talking all day, every day. The only piece of personal property that you might have is a chair, and that's because you put your shirt on that chair and that's now become yours. Otherwise, you don't have your own desk, you don't have your own chair, you don't have your own computer. So there's a lot of shared, you have to be able to share everything. You're sharing the code, there's no my code, it's our code. And at Hunter Industries, at least, we do not encourage remote work. We are all co-located in San Diego, and we want to have that because there's been studies that have found that there's a correlation between the proximity of teams and the amount of collaboration. So by sitting next to one another, face to face, we're getting that highest level of collaboration possible. There are teams that have done mob programming remotely, and I have some of their information in the references, but at Hunter Industries, we really don't we don't encourage remote work at all, so that's one of the biggest downsides. And there's not as much flexibility in the work schedule. We work from 8 to noon, lunches from noon to 1, and then we work from 1 to 4, and 4 to 5 is learning time. And it's very strict, it's a very strict schedule because we need the rest of the team there to work. We can't work alone, we can't just be there alone, right? Because we're not allowed to write any production code alone. So you're giving up a lot of flexibility, but you're also doing mob programming, which is really fun.
How do you deal with vacations?
Yeah.
People take vacations together at the same time?
So I'm on vacation right now, technically. Well, I'm not. I'm away from the team, and because of that knowledge sharing, because of the redundant knowledge, because there was 3 other people that were working on the feature with me that we were finishing up on Friday, those 3 people just keep going. There's no stopping. I can leave to go get coffee. I can leave to go run an errand. I can leave to go to a conference, and the code's moving forward. I am not. I'm going to just show up and the code just kind of jump right in and start with wherever their feature is. We use Kanban, so I can just look at our Kanban board and say, oh, looks like that feature was completed. Let's look at the next task that's on our priority.
But do you ever get down below, you get down to just one person left? And what do you do then?
Then you generally join a different project for that day, or you join a different team. And that has happened when we have a lot of people go to conferences, or just, it can happen. Especially some of our mobs are only 3 people, so it's pretty common for 2 people to be out. And that's when you can just hold on to a different project just to work that day. Yes?
You mentioned that all production code is worked on as a mob.
Yep.
What about things like prototypes, development tooling, continuous integration tool setup? When do you find time to do that? Is that all during the learning?
So that would be part of our normal, any DevOps kind of work is done as a team as well. So we're doing that as a mob. If you're doing a prototype or an experiment or a spike, that you're allowed to do on your own, but it can't go into production. So if you're like, okay, this spike looks like it's going to work, let's end up mobbing on it instead and move forward that way. So we really do not, we want 2 pairs of eyes at least on every piece of production code. Yes?
You guys review your own code? How does it work for the work processes and such?
Yeah, so there is no formal code review. It is live code reviews while we're in time developing it. So we develop the code, write it, push to master, and then it goes to our CI and CD server, and if it passes, it goes to the customer. Yeah. Question, Mike?
So, where is your testing? What kind of testing underlies what you're doing in Vermont? And what about integration testing? I mean, are you all doing all of that?
We are.
Part of the
Okay.
mapping?
So we're doing unit testing, we're doing test-driven development with all of our unit tests, and we do automated testing, integration testing as well. We do mock testing, and these are all automated to where our CI/CD machine actually runs it, and it's mostly on irrigation controllers. So we have hardware sitting in our, it's mostly just a closet. So we have hardware sitting in a closet that's running these tests. We have a test bench, and the entire software development lifecycle is completed as a mob. And that brings me to developer fatigue, where mob programming can be extremely draining. It requires a lot of focus. You're talking to people, being next to people every day. So some days it does look like this, where you're just like, I'm done, I'm beat. I've been talking, collaborating, working together all day, every day. So it can be very difficult to mob program all day. It's very different from a traditional style where you can maybe hide in a cubicle for an hour or 2. Here you're out in the open and talking and collaborating all day. So Aaron Griffith, a mob programmer, wrote an experience report about how mob programming is overstimulating and draining, especially for introverts, where just being around people and talking to people all day is, maybe he enjoys it, he loves mob programming, but just talking all day, it's very draining. And so he just mentioned how breaks and some alone time is really important while mob programming.
So I realize that your organization you're all encouraged to be there. That's the method you work. I'm the exact opposite. I literally work for a team that is 100% distributed.
Yes.
And you said that there are methods, and this has been like the barrier. Mm-hmm. That we've thought about it, it sounds interesting, but we've not really been able to implement it because, we're not there.
Yeah.
How can, let's say, because we have a team of 6 or 3 or whatever, what is something that we could do?
So I would recommend checking out, one of these. It used to be on here.
There's remote programming.
Bottom one says distributed work.
I don't know. I can get back to you on that. But INNOQ is a German company that does completely remote mobbing. Corgi Bytes is also a team that does 100% remote mobbing. And from what I understand, it's mostly them just running an EC2 instance on AWS that they all connect to and develop on. But INNOQ wrote a huge paper about how, or at least a document about how they mob program remotely and how they've made it successful. So I'd recommend checking that out.
Cool, okay, thank you.
Yes.
You've presented mob programming as like complete like lifestyle, work style like change, but in terms of, is there a way you could get some benefits, or how would you want to recommend it if a team maybe wants to mob like in the mornings or once a week, or
Yeah.
how do you?
So I would not recommend going to your team and saying, we're mob programming now. That sounds scary and terrible, and they're not even sure what a mob is. That just sounds terrible. So what we recommend is maybe even just an hour once a week, and starting there. And what really can help is by grabbing interested individuals first. Ask for people, hey, I want to introduce this idea of working together and mobbing. Is anyone interested? And at least the interested people can start, and that'll disperse and grow elsewhere. But if you start with trying to force people, or not really, if people aren't volunteering to begin with, then it's going to be difficult. But I can talk to more of that in a second. But I did want to mention psychological safety. This is something that's important not just on a mob, but on all teams, I believe. And it's, for me at least, it's the ability to challenge one another, to give and receive constructive feedback, both positive and negative, and be able to trust your teammates with what they're doing. So I'm trusting my teammates that they're doing the best that they can today while I'm not there. And we try to have as much of a psychological safe environment as possible. Google conducted a study and found that psychological safety was the #1 factor in how successful their teams were, and described it as the ability to be vulnerable with one another. It's really just being able to ask the right questions, being able to express yourself, and being able to not feel like you're going to be judged if you say anything. And that's really important in this environment. And it's really important in any environment. It's not just about being nice, it's about being able to share all of your ideas. Amy Edmondson has put out a lot of content on psychological safety and building that on teams. So if you're interested in more on psychological safety, I'd recommend some content by Amy Edmondson. Question in the back?
Can you tell me about a couple of the problems that you've had with mob? Because I know that you talk about personalities, and you have to show it. You have to like remove people, or just like switch teams a lot, or anything like that.
Yeah, so people have switched teams because of personalities, but we really want people to be able to give and receive that feedback. Right now we're doing some anonymous feedback, which we ideally would have it be in person and non-anonymous, so that you could actually be at that comfort level of giving feedback. But I can talk maybe more about that on problems that we've seen afterwards. But just to wrap things up, so Hunter Industries, we've been mob programming for 8 years now. I've been doing it for 4 years there. I love it. We do it because of the communication, the knowledge sharing, that idea generation, and the elevated learning that we get out of it. But if you've never mob programmed, at least in our environment, there's a very different work environment involved. It can be very draining, and there's a lot of developer fatigue. And then psychological safety is a really important aspect of it as well. At least some additional information, Woody Zuhl's Mob Programming, a Whole Team Approach book. It's available on LeanPub. I'd really recommend that as a first resource if you're interested in learning more. It talks about how you can get started on your own teams, how to create your own mob setups with the environments that you have. It talks about more on like how it started, where it's going, the problems it solves, and even goes into some of the financials and trying to convince other departments that you should be doing it. Chris Lucian is the current director of the software department. He has his own blog with a lot of good content on mob programming. And then there's also a day of mob programming time-lapse video on YouTube That's a really fun video to watch of just see what our work environment's like. It's a time lapse and shows kind of everything that goes on inside of our work environment. But thank you. My name is Thomas Desmond. I work at Hunter Industries. I'm a mob programmer there, and I really love doing it. If you'd like to contact me, Thomas J. Desmond, or on my website, tombaum.com. But otherwise, I'm not sure what I'm doing on time, but I know lunch is after this. But I'd love to answer any questions as well. I love talking about mob programming.